The reason I'm going to read a story from 25 Perfect Days is I've had a lot of friends keep telling me, like, man, I nailed so many different things that are happening now. 25 Perfect Days was written maybe 7 or 8 years ago. It's been a while, but it's a dystopian. If you haven't heard about it, it's dystopian slash horror. Some of the short stories I had written prior to putting them all together, my wife helped me see that it made for a really cool world. And then I just added to it. So originally it was 25 perfect days. I added five more, and then I just completed the 31st day, and we're going to be recording that audiobook soon, probably in the next week or so, and I'll put that out as a single. Pretty excited about it, but again, all those events were things that either I was afraid of happening in our country, or they're already happening in another country. The thing that I've been thinking about lately is for the story 8 out of 9. And I don't know if you guys have been looking at the news much. I try not to, I stay away from it. But the hysterectomies going on, or alleged hysterectomies going on at ICE centers, at the detention centers. Pretty scary stuff, but it's been done before. That's definitely where I got the idea from. But here, this is this article in The Guardian. He was talking about all the allegations that are going on now in the centers. So look into that. I don't know. I haven't done the research. I haven't verified whether or not shit's true or not. You never know nowadays. But in this Guardian thing, it says also in California prisons between 1997 and 2013, about 1,400 people were sterilized. Shit goes on like that all the time, especially in other countries. I think it's important to remember, not only does your country not give a shit about you as a person, they want your taxes, but they don't care about the actual individual. But other countries especially don't give a fuck about you. So, I don't know. It sucks. It's a shitty situation. I'm not going to get too political or into it. I will just read you a story. So, yeah, we're going to story time. 25 perfect days plus 5 more. This short story is 8 out of 9. All right. December 17th, 2056. Vanessa entered the waiting room. The door slammed shut behind her. The lock clicked. 4 rows of girls turned as one to see the new girl. Vanessa clutched the faded gray robe to her chest and slipped into the last row of plastic chairs. The center's oversized slippers slapped the tiles as she made her way past trembling knees. She didn't look at their faces, giving them the privacy she so desperately wanted. Halfway down the row, 2 girls clutched each other's hands. Vanessa wondered if they knew each other before today. The coarse robe scratched her bare flesh. Vanessa hurried and sat down on the last chair against the wall. The girl 2 seats down whispered something like hello. Vanessa nodded and stared at the sweet 14 slip in her hands. Her bright red fingernails were chipped. She needed to touch them up before she returned to work. This was the first time she'd rather be at her job. The crumpled card had her information printed on the front, and the penalty for not appearing on the back. She tried to steady her hands, search for some loophole, a mistake she missed, or a word they got wrong. This was the first piece of mail she'd ever received, the only one that would ever matter. 8 out of 9. Those were the odds every girl was given. The rectangular waiting room had no windows, the walls the color of a gray winter sky. The door she'd entered was behind her and locked. The massive metal door they'd all eventually walk through was directly in front of them. Vanessa tried not to think of the things taking place on the other side. She'd never seen the inside of a slaughterhouse, but that's what she pictured. Her father had told her stories before he died. He worked in one back when it was still safe to eat meat. He always said he felt sorry for the helpless creatures. It was like they knew what was coming, the way her parents must have felt the last time they went to the DMV. Vanessa tried to remember her father's face. It used to be so clear in her mind. She only knew her mother from the faded picture her father carried in his wallet. Part of her wished they were in the other room with the rest of the parents, all anxiously waiting to take home their little girls. But another part was glad they weren't around to see this. Large red letters scrolled on a continuous loop across the electronic display box above the steel door. Joanne Weaver. Vanessa wondered if Joanne was already on the other side of the door or if she was here waiting, cowering in her chair, clutching the last shred of hope they'd forget her and move on to the next girl. Vanessa looked around the room for Joanne. Every girl was different, none fat, but all degrees of skinny. Some were pale and ugly, others a little beautiful, even though they were crying. One girl with blonde hair just kept smiling. Vanessa wondered if the girl's mother had told her they might pass her over if she looked pretty. There were dark-skinned girls and blue-eyed girls. There were tall ones in every shade of hair. But while every girl was different, every girl was the same. Some hid the fear better, but no one wanted to be here, not on her birthday. Vanessa used to look forward to the little party her father and uncle would give her. They never had money, but they'd sing and split a stick of gum. When she turned 11, Vanessa's uncle took her to a field to shoot tin cans with a particle pistol. Vanessa hated the whirring noise it made when it was charging, but it made her giggle when the tin can would evaporate. That was the last year girls had options, back when the controllers actually paid those who volunteered. The box above the door chimed, and a mechanical voice said, "Michelle Jackson." A homely girl in the front row stood before her name finished scrolling across the display box. Her legs shook, but she held her head high as the metal door slid open and the guard clad in black entered the room. He was tall with a shaved head and a thin goatee. He grabbed Michelle's card and studied it. Vanessa eyed his electro-prod and shiny particle pistol. It looked nothing like the old-fashioned one she'd fired with her uncle. She didn't understand why a man twice Michelle's size needed a weapon at all. With those giant hands, he'd kill her with one punch. Michelle walked through the door, her head still held high. Vanessa hoped she'd be just as brave when her name was called. If Michelle had been attractive enough to find a decent husband who could support a family, would she still have been so quick to get up? Maybe Michelle never dreamed of being a mother. Even though Vanessa had never met her own, she always thought one day she'd have a kid, do all the things she could only imagine growing up, like story time or learning to put on lipstick. The woman who taught Vanessa told her to cake it on so men wouldn't focus on her wide nose. The girl 2 seats down was suddenly next to her, tapping on her leg. Vanessa hadn't realized she was shaking. Not from cold, not from fear, but out of anger. The controllers had taken everything. Her mother, her father. This was all she had left, and it'd be gone in the next 15 minutes. "Relax," the girl said gently. "They say it doesn't hurt." Vanessa stared at the girl's hand, the bright red fingernail polish, a clear sign they were both in the same line of work. Vanessa always told herself she was better than the others. She had her uncle to care for. All she had in common with the girl next to her was a birthday and the same shitty luck. The speaker called another name. When no one stood, the speaker blared the name again. "Karen Chin, stand up." The tiny girl seated in the second row shot up, beautiful black hair halfway down her back. She wavered slightly, looking like she might faint when the door slid open and the guard walked toward her. Karen screamed as they dragged her through the door. The girl next to Vanessa said, "It's for the best." "My sister just had a kid." She lowered her voice and said, "She refused to give him to the way. Now she's got to come up with $500 a month for the orphanage until he's adopted. Believe me, this is better." Vanessa nodded, trying to force herself to believe that was true. If she ever got pregnant, she knew she'd sacrifice everything. She'd be a good mother. Her dad always told her that, said Vanessa had the same heart as the woman she never knew. The box chimed again and the speaker buzzed to life. Vanessa Salazar. A hiss of static, then nothing. Vanessa's name scrolled across the box in red letters. The speaker squawked her name again. Vanessa bit her tongue. She wouldn't yell or cry or let them see the fear. She could hold on to that. The door slid open. The guard that had taken the other girls away appeared in the doorway, his cold eyes searching the room. If he wanted to take her, he'd have to come and physically rip her from the seat. Vanessa wanted him to grab her. She'd claw his eyes, rip out his throat, and escape. She was small and he'd underestimate her, not ready for the fury raging inside. The guard called her name. Vanessa wanted to rush him, but that'd only work if the rest of the girls would follow. There were enough, but if she called them to arms, she knew most wouldn't budge. She needed the element of surprise. She'd wait until the prick was inches away. Population control cards out. Names up, he ordered. The guard walked down the first row, read each girl's slip. At the end of the second row, he got on his transmitter. Barnett here. I'm going to need Williams. Barnett grabbed another card, read it, and shoved it back to the girl. Halfway down the third row, Vanessa could see his forearm muscles twitching, the excitement in his eyes. He lived for someone to resist, dragging innocent girls into the back, sticking his hands underneath their robes, having his way with them. Why else would he work here? Barnett moved down her row. His hand rested on the butt of his pistol. She tried to remember what her uncle had taught her. Arms locked, shoulders square. But he never taught her how to disarm anyone, and if she couldn't get it from him, the prick would kill her. Vanessa no longer cared. She'd be with her parents. She'd never have to go back to work. Her uncle would understand. She kept telling herself, even as the images of him starving to death fired off in her head. Gasping, too weak to even take his own life. The guard stopped in front of her chair. Turn over your card. Vanessa stared straight ahead. He ripped the card out of her hands and waved over the fat guard walking through the doorway. Barnett pointed at the display and asked Vanessa, "Are you deaf?" She shook her head, not understanding why she couldn't move her arms and go for the gun. Then get up. Vanessa couldn't. She tried to stand, but her legs felt like they were filled with cement. Williams walked over, knelt in front of her, his eyes surprisingly soft. Look, Vanessa, you have to get up. There's no choice. She's not getting up. Grab an arm. Give me a second. Williams lowered his voice and whispered, if you don't stand up, they'll make us use force. And if you fight, they're going to do what it says on the back of your card. Trust me, you don't want that. Vanessa didn't believe his kindness. It was a trick. His eyes were probably always watery. No one cared about her, at least not in this place. Just walk with us, he said. You'll barely feel it. Barnett tapped Williams, who finally got up and moved to the left. They each took hold of her arms. Their fingers dug into her flesh. They yanked her from the chair, dragging her toward the door. She opened her mouth to shriek, but couldn't make a sound. Pretending like he wasn't enjoying her terror, Williams grunted and told Barnett, Still wonder why I'm transferring to the prison? The tips of Vanessa's slippers bent backward on the tiles as they neared the door. They crossed the threshold and the door slid shut, her body suddenly awake. She'd been mistreated by men, but never like this. She felt their hands loosen. They thought they were safe. Vanessa flung herself from their grip. Barnett grabbed her by the hair, reached for the electroprod on his belt. Better relax. Vanessa spun, the hairs ripping from her scalp. She launched a knee at his groin, heard the crunch. He let go of her and dropped to the floor, but Williams was right behind him. Vanessa took one step back and braced herself for his attack. Williams stepped toward her. Hey, let's calm down. Vanessa ran at him and raked his face with her fingernails. Her fingers found a chain around his neck and ripped it off when he pushed her away. The crucifix at the end of the chain hung in the air for only a moment before Vanessa snatched it and plunged the long end into Williams' cheek. Williams screamed, one hand on the cross, the other reaching for Vanessa. Vanessa ducked under his arm, flipped the tab, and ripped the pistol from the holster. Barnett was back on his feet, the buzzing prod in his hand. Drop the gun, or I'm going to have fun with you. Vanessa backed against the wall, the gun aimed at Barnett's chest. There was a hallway to the right. She inched her way over, her thumb fumbling for the safety. It wasn't where it had been on her uncle's pistol. Finally, she found it. Whirring filled the air. Barnett's hand moved towards his own pistol. Do it and I'll shoot, Vanessa said. Barnett's hand steadied, hovered over his pistol. Vanessa's gun was fully charged. She couldn't tell what Barnett was going to do, but then his eyes narrowed. There was no way he'd let her go. His thumb slowly flipped open the tab, and Vanessa squeezed. The force shot her back, nearly sent her to the ground. When she opened her eyes, she saw Barnett's arm vanish under his sleeve. He flailed and slammed against a gurney. She turned, saw the emergency exit down the hall. Barnett's scream cut through the buzzing in her ears. Vanessa passed a small room with a tray of sharp instruments. The girl on the table with her legs in stirrups, ankles strapped down, towel stuffed in her mouth. There wasn't enough time to save her. She heard other guards coming. Williams called out to her. He pulled the cross from his cheek. Blood poured from the gaping hole. You can't run forever. Vanessa shot the lock off the emergency exit and kicked open the door. I can try. Alright guys, 25 Perfect Days. That story is about halfway through the book. If you haven't checked it out, do so. It's probably it had some really good reviews. On the back, here we go. This is from Indie Reader. Perfectly disturbing, a walk through a possible future as bleak as George Orwell's 1984. Scary, realistic, and satisfying. They also named it one of the best indie books for 2013. This was really cool, from the Minneapolis Books Examiner. One of the better science fiction books I've read in a long time. This is a novel that deserves much more acclaim. And last one, if you love dystopian stories with a wide scope of realistic social and moral issues, you'd probably enjoy 25 Perfect Days. Alright guys,